everyone joining in. I hope your Friday is going well. It's 2 o'clock, so we're starting. My name is Nena Paul Ugochukwu from Paradigm Initiative. I'm a member of the AIRA Oversight Group. AIRA is an alliance of mission-aligned African CSOs working to advance digital rights and internet freedoms across the continent. We envision an Africa where digital rights and internet are upheld in all aspects of life, governance, and the economy, ensuring equity and prosperity across Africa. As a network, we host quarterly conversations among policymakers, practitioners, and interested individuals on digital rights developments across Africa. AIRA Talks offers us the opportunity for stakeholders to share learnings and experiences with the aim of enhancing collaboration and impact. In the spirit of the African Union's Year of Education, this edition of AIRA Talks is geared towards sharing learnings through lightning talks. So for this special edition, our speakers are drawn from AIRA member organizations, and today they'll be taking us through the role of digital rights in achieving the AU's agenda for education. In other words, how advancing digital rights can ensure safe, accessible, inclusive education for all. Is unmuted. Okay. So we are hoping that these concentrated doses of information will spark more in you and serve as catalysts for further engagement and advocacy on the role digital rights play in building more resilient education systems in Africa. I know we're in for a treat. So on behalf of the AIRA OGs, I would like to welcome you all to this edition of AIRA Talks, happy learnings, fruitful engagements. And on that note, please welcome our moderator for the session who has put together these AIRA Talks, the AIRA coordinator, Adeboro. Welcome, Adeboro.
Thank you so much, Nena. Welcome, everyone. Please just confirm that your mics are off. I'm going to be muting you.
Ultra.
Please mute your mics if you are
multiple mics. All right, thank you. All right, so once again, welcome to these AIRA Talks. As Nena has said, AIRA Talks are they're a platform for very, very engaging conversations. And this is our third AIRA Talks for the year. You can find our previous AIRA Talks on our website and on our YouTube channel. I'll put the details in the chat. I also want to confirm that this session is being recorded because we want to make the replay of it available on our YouTube channel. So if you would like to know how to listen to it again, I will drop a link to sign up for our newsletter on the chat as well, and you can sign up very easily. I also invite you to find AIRA on Twitter and on LinkedIn and follow us because we share a lot of content that we think you would find very useful. So today, without further ado, let me introduce the 6 topics and speakers that we'll be having. The lightning talks are very short, very quick, so you don't want to multitask while listening. It's going to be lots of information being thrown rapidly at you, so please pay attention so that you can ask very important questions. We're starting off with CC Hub, who is represented by Oluwaseun Adepoju, presenting on strengthening education systems with data-driven decision-making. Then we move to Doreen from CPIT, who will present to us Artificial Intelligence, Education and Ethics, a look at intelligent tutoring systems in Kenya. Then we move to Nicodemus from Kitanet, who will present to us Assistive Technology for Inclusive Education in Africa. And then to Devon Turner from LRC, who will present to us Equitable Access to Digital Education. And then to Khadija El Usman, who will present to us Protecting Children Learners from Cyberbullying and Harmful Content in the Use of the Internet for Learning. She is from Paradigm Initiative. And finally, we will wrap up with Rashid from Policy, who will present to us Mitigating Algorithmic Bias in the development and use of artificial intelligence. Once again, please pay close attention. And if you have questions at any point, please pop them in the chat, and our speakers will take them immediately they are done. And so now I'll hand over the mic to Oluwaseun while I share my screen to present his presentation.
Why is Nana here with her face showing?
Thank you, Adebora. Good afternoon, everyone. Great pleasure to be here. I believe there's no other time to have this type of conversation than now. Very important that we have this kind of conversation as professionals working in this field. Today, I'll be speaking about strengthening education systems with data-driven decision-making. As you know, education is a field that has a lot of vested interest from politicians to professionals, to NGOs, to education leaders, to school leaders, to education investors. It's a very interesting field and sector of the society that has a lot of interest. And it's very important that we get it right. The quality of thinking in the society is dependent on how we have been able to innovate with education and the quality of it. Also, the solution to most of the most wicked problems in the society will be dependent on the quality of education that citizens of a particular country get. So I'll be taking us through some of these rapid insights on education and using data for decision-making in education. Next. I want to start this lightning talk by speaking to dating the data. The same way we take somebody we love out on a date. So from the first date of taking somebody you love out, the first date is usually to get to know the person. And at this stage, you are open. You're also very curious to know about the person. So in dating the data, first of all, you want to be open and curious about what data can do for you and the type of data you should be collecting to make decisions, especially in the domain of education. And when the first date goes really well, you want to take the person out on a second date. And on the second date, you want to really know the person deeper on another deeper level, and you want to be able to have a lot of insight about them. And the same way you take data on a second date. At this second stage of this date, you want to really understand a lot of things from the data and generate insights that can help you make decisions. When the second date goes well, you want to take things further and you are beginning to dedicate yourself, time and resources to this person. And the same way for data, at this stage, you want to really understand and respect the data to the point where you are now thinking about what are the types of innovative products or innovative decision-making that this data can do for you. And the fact that you are committed in a relationship or to this new lover does not mean that there won't be challenges or drama of miscommunication. And this is why at this stage, you want to establish a data culture that prioritizes openness, honesty, and diversity. This is important, especially in education, where we have a lot of underserved community, where we have a lot of equality issues and quality issues with education and learning outcomes as well. Next. So in order to understand the significance of data-driven decision-making in education, I want us to know that there is a current global challenge in education, which is the challenge of unequal access and also the issue of learning disparities. And when we understand what data can do for us, we're able to disrupt these spaces very well. Data can help us also look at educational challenges through informed actions. For example, we want to understand the types of learners in a particular setting, not only in the classroom, because education is driven across different platforms and mediums. But we can make better decisions in terms of education on equality issues when we have insight from data on how each learner is doing. And also benefit of utilizing data in education is to, first of all, improve teaching strategies. When we gather information and data from the teachers or the facilitators of the learning, as the case may be, we're able to optimize our educational outcomes and re-strategize in case a particular strategy is not working. Next. So it's important for us to also speak about the role of data in decision making in education. Number the one type of data we need to be collecting is student data, and this is why it's important that we understand that students in a particular room, whether they are 30 or 20, they are learning. They belong to different learning clusters. Many of them are special learners. Many of them are straight learners. Many of them are visual learners. Many of them are audio learners. And we must be able to gather data that helps us inform the type of decision we make in terms of assessment and in terms of how we relate with each of the students and how we assess each of the students. Another type of data that we should collect in education is school data in a school setting, which looks at infrastructural details, community engagement, and education environment. It is important that at the school leadership level and the classroom management level, we also have this type of data to make decisions. And it's also important for us to collect teachers' data. You can see a lot of NGOs now doing work in school leadership. It is important because the facilitators of learning are as important as the people they are facilitating learning for. So performance metrics, even behavioral spectrums of teachers is important in facilitating learning for the students and how we make decisions about them. And finally, administrative data, which helps us make decisions in funding, makes decisions in resource allocation, and also how we structure and distribute resources for achieving learning outcomes for the learning institution. Next. So in terms of benefits of data-driven decision-making in education, number one, it helps us improve student outcomes. Without data, we cannot make good decisions. And I want us to know that in education, we cannot afford to make wrong decisions in education. The same thing in healthcare. There are some sectors where we must rely on data to make at least 95% accurate spectrum of decision making, because we are talking about the future, we are talking about the destiny of the future generation, but also the need of the current environment and society in which we operate. Number two, it enhances teachers' performance. When we have data to make decisions on how our teachers are performing, we're able to give them feedback and also structure our next strategies in such a way that it drives learning outcome. Also, in terms of efficient resource allocation, it's very important that we use data for this, and then policy making for education and learning outcomes. Next. So for strategies for overcoming barriers, there are barriers in gathering data, specifically in education. Number one, building data infrastructure and ensuring data security. The education space needs a lot of safeguarding, especially because we are dealing with student data, and there's a lot of personal behavioral learning and psychological data that is being collected. So it's important that we build infrastructure for security. Training educators and administrators on data literacy as well is very important. We cannot give what we don't have. So as administrators of learning, we need to know how to collect data, clean data, make decisions from the data, and present the data for insight. And number three is establishing clear data governance policy. This is something that every institution sitting on learners' data must implement. This is not really even dependent on where we're operating. For all around the world now, people are taking data protection and data privacy very important, and we must have data governance. Who has access to what? Who are we sharing learners' data with? And a lot of protocols that is around that. Then encouraging a culture of continuous improvement through data is very important. When we base our decisions on data, we're able to make the right decision, spend our investment correctly, and also ensure that we're driving learning outcomes. And lastly, next, so we need to look at future trends so that we can better prepare. Today is a foundation for tomorrow. So number one, we need to realize that in the next 5 to 10 years, which we're already seeing, there will be a lot of personalized learning and adaptive learning technologies. And with frontier technologies like AI, we're already seeing some of these solutions. And then increase in big data and predictive analytics. Schools become tech companies that are driving learning, not schools gathering data in the future. Then integration of social and emotional learning, which is very important in education. The emotional learning data help students better. The rise of digital assessment and real-time feedback system. I think this will be the future of education, where teachers are no longer teachers, but facilitators of learning. And it's not going to be sage on the stage, but guide on the science philosophy type of education. Thank you for listening.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Oluwaseun, for those really interesting thoughts and interesting insights. Remember that if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box so that we take them we give them priority when we're taking questions. Very interesting. Not to waste our time or go over what he said, let's go straight to Doreen from CPIT, who will be speaking to us on artificial intelligence, education, ethics, a look at intelligent tutoring systems in Kenya. Doreen, you have the mic.
Thank you, Adeboro. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'll wait for you to put my presentation up. Thank you. So just following on to what has already been discussed, I'll just start with a small quote. We need education in every classroom and in every student and teacher's hand because it is the pen and paper of our time, and it is the lens through which we experience much of our world. So that's the start off to our presentation. Next slide, please. So what is intelligent tutoring systems, or ITS? So ITS represent a subset of AI applications that are designed to provide personalized instruction and feedback to students. And these systems mimic human tutors by adapting to the individual learning needs of students, thus enhancing the educational experience. So why is this relevant in Kenya? In Kenya, this is relevant because we have educational resources that are often limited, and ITS presents a promising solution to bridge the gaps in educational quality and accessibility. Next slide, please. So the history of ITS, or intelligent tutoring systems, basically began in the 1970s and the 1990s, and this will be shared. So this is just showing the evolution of ITS from an application called Scholar to now cognitive tutor and to what we have today. Next slide, please. So what are the current global trends in ITS? So we have advanced AI techniques like Alex, Newton, and Carnegie learning that utilize machine learning algorithms, and these systems usually or continually assess and adapt to student performance and personalized learning. Then, as I've mentioned, Alex and Newton and Carnegie. Then we have enhanced capabilities. So the incorporation of machine learning and natural language processing has enabled more accurate assessments and nuanced feedback. Nuanced feedback for students. Then we have research insights, including those by, I was still on the previous slide. We've gone to the, okay, I'll just move on to state of education in Kenya. So what are the let's just move on to the challenges in education in Kenya. So so this is the state of education in Kenya. So we have understaffing in public schools leading to a severe teacher shortage. But on this point, it's important to note that there actually is enough human resource. It's just the recruitment of the human resource that is limited. So that is why the understaffing is there. Then there's also massive unplanned expansions of schools, resulting in overcrowding and a lack of adequate infrastructure and resources. And there's also the inability of parents to provide subsistence, which affects their ability to support the children's education. And there's also quality issues such as lack of teaching materials and inadequate teacher training. There's also insecurity and cultural limitations, which is a gendered aspect, which further enhances marginalization. And there's also insufficient inclusivity for the disabled. Next slide, please. So in Kenya, we have the Digital Literacy Program, DLP, and this is a government initiative that is aimed at improving digital literacy through targeted training and educational programs. So this is important because ITS is educational based and it also is technology based. So Kenya is trying to mainstream digital literacy into the curriculum of educational programs. So we have the key achievements, 75,000 plus teachers have been trained on this DLC program. Then the program focus is basically on digital competency through developing fundamental digital skills. Then we also have information literacy, which teaches effective information search, evaluation and usage, and there's also data protection. Those are the core program focuses of the DLP. And the impact is to empower educators and students and to equip the use of digital skills and tools responsibly and effectively. Next slide, please. So the next slide is on adoption of AI in education in Kenya. So in Kenya, we have various platforms that use AI. So there's Mshule, which tracks learner performance patterns and conducts data analysis for personalized recommendations and helps teachers focus on individualized mentorship and instruction. There's also iMlango that provides digital educational services and content and targets hard-to-reach learners in rural areas. And what is the impact of all of these? They enhance personalized learning and they also bridge educational gaps in undeserved regions. In addition to this, we also have Angaza Elimu, and we also have Angaza Elimu, and we also have Mwalimu Plus. So what are the barriers to adoption of ITS? There's unavailability of technological hardware and supply of electricity. There's also unreliability of access to the internet and high cost of data, and the students' lack of basic ICT skills. There's also language differences and barriers and lack of culturally appropriate content. Next slide, please. So what are the impacts of ITS on students and teachers? I'll just gloss over this one. So there's changes in teaching methodologies. So we have customized learning, where ITS systems offer personalized education to that are tailored to individual students' needs. And there's also student engagement and performance. So there's real-time data that provides immediate insights on the student's performance, helping to identify areas for improvement. Next slide. Next slide, please. So now we look at the ethical considerations. So we have data privacy and security. So the key point is there's need for protection of student data, and that's very crucial. That's a very crucial aspect in the rollout of ITS. The context in this is that ITS collects a lot of data and also analyzes vast student data. So Kenya's evolving data protection regulations need to take this into consideration even as ITS is being mainstreamed into educational systems. So what is the action needed? I've just mentioned that. Implement stringent measures to safeguard information and the rights of data subjects. There's also equity and accessibility. The key point is to ensure that ITS is accessible to all students. The context, potential risk of exacerbating educational inequalities, and it is important to ensure that there's equal access regardless of social economic status. Yes. Next slide, please. There's also teacher-student dynamics. So it's important to note that in as much as we are rooting for AI in integration in education, there should be a balance between AI-driven instruction and human interaction. So ITS should not replace human teachers, but should rather complement education. So the importance is it's important to have that relational and emotional aspect in education. There's someone whose mic is unmuted. So the next point is on global and local ethical issues. So the key point is to address algorithmic bias and accountability. So looking into issues of data privacy, fairness, and AI systems, and ensuring transparency and stakeholder trust. Kenyan context, so it's important to look into the socioeconomic and cultural factors and the digital divide. And there's also need for locally tailored ethical frameworks and guidelines. Next slide, please. So we have a vast policy and regulatory framework in Kenya that deals with education. There's the Constitution, there's the Basic Education Act, there's the Education Act, and all these other acts. And most importantly now for ITS, there's the Data Protection Act and the Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act. Next slide, please. So what are the policy recommendations? Number one, there's access and equity. So it is very important to address undeserved student populations, that is rural areas and informal settlements, and even those with disabilities, and ensure that ITS availability is mainstreamed regardless of socioeconomic background, geographic location, or disability. There's also the second point is on ethical issues. So it's important to address algorithmic bias. So it is important to train ITS on inclusive and diverse data sets and ensure that there's transparency and explainability. There's also the third point, which is on infrastructure and connectivity. It is important to provide reliable electricity, internet, and access to devices, which is important in closing the digital divide. The next point is on teacher training and support. So it's important to recognize ITS as a supplement and not a replacement of teachers. And cultural and local language localization. So it's important to localize and accommodate cultural and linguistic diversity in ITS rollout. And then data privacy. It's important to develop policies that address data collection, security, and children's privacy rights. Next point, or next slide. Thank you. That's really all for now.
Thank you so much, Doreen, for running us through those very important insights. Again, if you have any questions, any thoughts, any comments, please note them down in the chat box and the speakers will take them immediately after. Without wasting too much time, we'll move on to our next speaker, Nicodemus Inyakundi, apologies, from Kiktanet, who's going to be speaking to us on assistive technology for inclusive education in Africa. Nicodemus, please take us away.
Yes, thank you so much. My name is Nicodemus Nyakundi. I come from Kiktanet, that's Kenya ICT Action Network. Kiktanet is an ICT policy think tank working in Kenya and across Africa. And we encourage synergies for ICT policy activities and initiatives. Next. So I'm going to speak about assistive technology for inclusive education in Africa. And our objective will be to understand how assistive technology in education serves to bridge the disability and promote inclusivity, and also how it is a tool that enables rights to education. Next. So our topic will specifically focus on the role of inclusive education, or the role of assistive technology in inclusive education. And in such cases, it will be on accessibility and participation, academic engagement, independent and self-advocacy. We also look at inclusive learning environment, addressing specific needs of persons with disabilities, and also we'll focus on challenges, that is barriers that persons with disabilities experience in the education. So to start with, I really need to define assistive technology in a very short way. And I'll focus on Assistive Technology Initiative Association, definition of assistive technology in that it is any item, piece of equipment, software program, or product system that is used to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capability of persons with disabilities. And in summary, we'll have to say that it serves to maintain and improve one's functioning and independence. Then if we go into inclusive education, it is an educational approach that considers the needs of every learner and promotes their participation. And in short, that is, it can be simply defined as education that fits. And from my end, I'll say that that's an education that encompasses all and ensure that every learner at any region or situation can learn with all non-disabled learners. And we can look at, for example, the provisionals of AU Continental Education Strategy for Africa. What do they have for persons with disabilities? How are these outlined in ensuring that there is an inclusive education? This is a question I put here specifically so that as we go on to ponder, like, is it really covered to ensure that learners with disabilities have an equitable access to education? And also, we can also ponder on the SDG 4 that ensures inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. Next. Next slide, please. Yes. So accessibility and participation. How does assistive technology allow this? We have seen tools like screen readers, speech-to-text software, and the keyboards that help to break down the barriers by making education content more accessible. And in this form, we are speaking of the usability bit of assistive technology. In that, if a person with a certain form of disability, let's say visually impaired, they're not able to use the written books, they can use the braille book. So those are just simple forms of assistive technology. And also we have seen people with hearing losses and motor difficulties. We tend to incorporate assistive technology to help them access the learning materials. In this case, I don't want to put the blame on the construction or development of learning materials. That is coming later. But here we want to focus on the role that assistive technology is playing in ensuring that learners can use even the already existing materials to learn. And here I put a question to ask that, why is Africa not having inclusive learning education system? And what role can assistive technology play in this point to ensure that every learner can access education system without any difficulty? Another importance of assistive technology is academic engagement and achievement, in that it supports personal learning experiences and tailors content delivery to individual needs. We have seen that persons with disabilities may have like learning difficulties, developmental disabilities require a certain approach to education system, and that is the point where assistive technologies plays in. And in some instances, we have seen that in Africa, we have 10 to 20 of Africans have a disability. This is not a very concrete evidence on data, given that in some areas we have seen even up to 2%, which is not supportive of the number of disabilities in Africa. But the question is, can digital technology help in disaggregating this data, specifically on learners with disabilities? Can we also ensure that we use assistive technologies in accessing, in sourcing data on person disabilities? Then we have independency and self-advocacy. This one is promoted in that a learner can do learning themselves. They don't need much support from external persons. And as such, it promotes like the morale of a student, and they are able to do activities themselves. That also includes the reason why we have seen less learners with disabilities taking up STEM courses, because you find like the sciences, they need practical activities, which sometimes is a challenge to persons with disabilities. Next. Then we have an inclusive learning environment. In this situation, we have seen that sometimes assistive technologies come into the physical form of disability, in that they help a person maybe using a wheelchair to access a certain building and so forth. And here we have to promote an assistive technology that normalizes diversity and encourages empathy. And also teachers can design lessons that accommodate various learning styles and abilities. And in this point, I also have to notify that assistive learning technologies is not for learners only. It can be used also by teachers who have disability. And that will ensure that every bit of the learning environment is accommodative, so that we don't have teachers struggling to educate even non-disabled children because they are teachers with disabilities. Next. Then we have the role of assistive technology in addressing specific needs, whereby we have different disabilities that require different solutions. And also it caters to specific challenges, whether it is providing alternative communication methods for nonverbal students or adapting materials for dyslexic learners. We have seen over time that disability is very diverse. We have different forms of disabilities that whereby one solution does not solve all of the problems that person with disabilities face. And as such, we can see that when we bring in the assistive technologies, it comes like a tailored solution to each and specific need of a learner. And also, it is noteworthy to note that we can't leave everything to machines. And in this form, there is a need to call for assistive services. And in this, we have to adopt or strategize our training forms in a way that they adapt to the needs of persons with disabilities. A teacher is able to adjust their schedules in a way that accommodates persons with disabilities who may need a break or an extra time to maybe understand a concept. Then very fast, we'll move to challenges that assistive technology faces. First is the cost of assistive technology. Hereby, we have seen that most of assistive technology are not manufactured locally, even in Africa as a whole, but are imported from the West and the East. And this also includes the production cost in case it is within a country. Another thing is the stigmatization and stereotyping of assistive technologies within our systems, whereby we have seen that anyone using a tool to access education is poor academically, and that's a stereotype that needs to be broken. And also we have seen a stigmatization of teachers in that those who use assistive technologies are deemed to be ineffective. And that is a myth that needs to be dismantled and will ensure that people understand the role of assistive technology in our systems. Another thing is lack of or poorly structured legal frameworks. We don't have laws that really govern the acquisition of assistive technology, even deployment of them. This also looks into the roles like the standard bodies on ensuring that there is standardized and good quality assistive devices in the systems of our learners within our countries. That is the end of me. But my key question is, why are we not including learners with disability within normal schools? What is the role of, let's say, special schools, and how best can we ensure that we integrate learners from special schools to other learning institutions to ensure that they are accommodated in the community? Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nicodemus. For me, I can see that that was a very insightful session, and I'm looking forward to the questions that you will get from this very wonderful presentation. By the way, Nicodemus and Doreen, and I know Yvonne has done that already. When you're done with your presentation, please put your contact details in the chat box for people who want to follow up these conversations with you and maybe don't want to ask questions here. We're already getting some questions on the chat. That's really good. We'll take them after all the talks. We have 3 more talks to go. And so right now, I'll hand over to Devon Turner from the Legal Resources Center.
Good afternoon, everyone. Adibora, I think you just, yeah, perfect. Yeah. So I'm from the Legal Resources Center. The Legal Resources Center is a legal human rights NGO based in South Africa. And one of the focus areas that we have is in the right to education specifically. And so that has left us at the precipice of working on digital rights and the right to education. Next slide, please, Adiboro. So shortly, I mean, obviously as lawyers, then we have to look at the law as it applies. So first and foremost, the LRC actually provided a research report on the digital rights of children. The report is titled Digital Education and the Right to Learn. And in it, we discuss some parts of digital literacy in South Africa, how there hasn't been enough distribution of, or at least the ability to enjoy digital rights. There hasn't been enough rollout in schools of computers and digital infrastructure within schools themselves. We address some of the issues related to domestic law and policy and the international law and policy. At the crux of the argument, of course, the crux of the issue is that there's a constitutional right to education in South Africa, and we believe that that constitutional right intrinsically includes the right to internet access, so digital rights within that right to education. We see that right to access the internet as an essential component of that right to education. Importantly as well, besides the constitutional obligation within South Africa, we also believe that we don't believe there is in fact an international obligation to have the right to internet. That is contained in UN General Comment 25 from the Committee on the Rights of the Child as well. And next slide, please, Adiboro. Importantly, within the South African context, the Department of Basic Education in South Africa, their failure to properly implement and ensure realization of that right to internet access for learners has become glaringly obvious and apparent within South Africa. Um, the crux of our research and the crux of us addressing this issue actually reared its head during the COVID-19 pandemic, in which schools obviously was closed during the pandemic, and learners working remotely didn't have any access to education, especially from impoverished communities. So during COVID-19, if anything, we saw the discrimination that exists when learners don't have access to internet at schools. After engaging in research and consultations with communities, we deduced that internet access in schools requires urgent attention as an essential issue, not only for litigation, but I think advocacy in general on the issue. Importantly, we've identified digital rights as forming an integral part of the right to education, as I mentioned. In South Africa, the right to education has been deemed as an immediately realizable right. So what that means is that government has to do everything within their power as soon as possible to ensure that this right is exercised. Beyond, something like the right to health, where you can say, we don't have the means necessarily to roll it out to everyone at this point in time for something specific. Education is one of those rights specifically that is immediately realizable. Given that fact, of course, the constitutional right and the immediately realizable fact, our Department of Education in South Africa themselves also realize the value of this intrinsic right to education. And the department themselves have provided minimum norms and standards on infrastructure. And this minimum norms and standards actually specifically also compels internet access as a minimum standard within school infrastructure. Next slide, please. Given that we have this constitutional right to education, given the fact that there is international law specifically that says that the right to internet access is an essential right, given that our own Department of Basic Education implemented norms and standards that say that internet access should be given, our intention, obviously, overall, I would say advocacy as the first starting point, but possibly with the end of it, litigation, which declares specifically that the digital rights of children are an intrinsic part of the right to education in South Africa. I must say, in defense of the powers that be in education, they've actually met with us and they understand and know that they've actually fallen short of their own obligations to provide internet access. So there have been meetings in which they've shown they have a willingness to roll out digital platforms. Beyond their willingness, which I think is which is good from our part, we need something to roll the ball even further down the line. Beyond the advocacy, of course, we believe that some form of litigation or advocacy in that sense, which officially declares that right to internet access as part of the right to education, would be an important step forward to affirm the right to education in South Africa. On an international level, obviously, there's opportunities for international advocacy and submissions. The LRC themselves did a 2023 submission to the Committee on the Rights of the Child, specifically affirming that our government in South Africa has been woefully short our government in South Africa has been woefully short in rolling out internet access, and this right should then be further strengthened and better input should be done to ensure that rollout. But importantly, I think for the context of this call, it's regional support on the issues. We've received support from our AIRA network, but I think the most important for this kind of talk that we have is other countries to look at it. We've seen from the previous speakers on the importance of digital rights and digital education. So I think if anything, if you can use the South African example, even further within the continent itself, obviously there's a need for greater access to internet for schools. But I think it's important to look at it as part of that essential right to education, which is something that is universal. So in affirming that right to education, let's include digital rights within the discussion as an important for the way forward. Thank you very much, Deborah.
Thank you so much, Devon. I think you raised really important issues for regional collaboration, to the great work that LRC has done. Thank you so much for sharing. And now we move to the next speaker. We have Khadija El Usman from Paradigm Initiative. Khadija, you have the mic.
Thank you, Boro, and good day, everyone. So we can start by acknowledging that a significant challenge in Africa is literacy. And when I say literacy in this instance, I mean reading and writing. While progress has been made, these are some of the estimated percentages per region of those who are able to read and write. And as good as it might look to you, depending on what grade system you might have used in school, the literacy gap has far-reaching implications. Limiting some of these far-reaching implications are economic opportunities and social mobility. Next slide, please. In this context, digital learning, next slide. In this context, digital learning emerges as, no, still on previous slide. Digital learning is a powerful tool to bridge this gap. By leveraging technology, we can provide educational opportunities to those who might otherwise be left behind. In case you're having a hard time picturing what this looks like, digital learning is learning that is facilitated by technology that gives learners some control over the time, place, path, or pace of their learning, whether it's through mobile phones, laptops, other digital devices. You can also picture the Udemy's, YouTube, and others of the world. Next slide. So this is a great equalizer, as many have said before. It provides unmatched flexibility to specific needs, depending on how learners learn, visual, auditory, etc. It enhances their communication skills. And as we embrace this new era of education, it is crucial, and we acknowledge the many benefits that come with it, we must then acknowledge the harms that come with it. Next slide. Despite the numerous advantages to digital learning, it comes with significant risks, and these can be categorized into four: the content, contact, conduct, and contracts. Call it the four C's. So based on content, they can be exposed to harmful content which can be inappropriate for their age, such as violence or discriminatory content. There can also be risks with contact. They can come in contact with, well, harmful interactions, which might be from adults or their own peers. There's also the matter of conduct, what they participate in when they're participating in this online learning. And then there is contract, which is the final category, and it involves them being exploited. Sometimes there are hidden costs, such as the control over the data that the learning platform that they're using might have. It's also important to point at this point that while some harmful content is illegal, some harmful content is something that one can say slips through the cracks. So there are illegal content such as maybe sexual abuse. Others might not be illegal, such as promoting contents like eating disorders, or such as, promoting content on terrorism, as has been seen more recently today. We've also seen situations where users or the use of artificial intelligence in education might cause or exacerbate these risks. Next slide. Then there's the matter of cyberbullying. These have been divided into the categories of, the types that happen, the impacts that they have. And I'm just, skipping through a lot of this because of the time. Let's talk a bit about protecting children in the digital world. First of all, I see that a lot of suggestions have been made about collecting data, how we use educational technology, but we need to evaluate the types of policies that we put out. We should not be deploying any sort of educational technologies without evaluating the policies properly. We should be able to manage what digital communications look like, and this is to all stakeholders involved, evaluating what digital communications look like when it comes to children to ensure their safety. To and supervision of parental and caregiver communication. Parents and caregivers must be informed about the educational technology tools that they are using, that their wards are using in school. That way they are able to support their use at home. And while we're all very familiar with adults taking responsibility for the way that they interact online, child learners must also be supported to have the tools to communicate responsibly while online. Something that is very important to note is that there must be robust report and response systems for where abuse and exploitation come in. In many African countries, you'd find that there is no direct pipeline for reporting abuse, where children especially come in encounter with some of these risks. We must be able to manage these situations properly. Next slide. While this is generally still part of the previous slide in terms of strategies for protection, I think one of the biggest strategies that we'll need is the collaboration of all stakeholders involved. While we are thinking of how to deploy educational technologies, while some people might be advocating for how some of this data must be collected, all stakeholders must be involved. Governments must be involved, civil society must be involved, tech companies must be involved. There must be collaborations and consultations to ensure that there is a safer digital learning environment for learners. Next slide. And which would bring me to the end of my presentation. It is still my call to action for all who are present here, or stakeholders, depending on your area of influence. Ensure that you consider the risks in the technology that you are deploying, or if you're not in the position to deploy technology, you ensure that you consult with all the stakeholders in the room and remember our child learners in, well, your policies. Thank you.
Thank you, Khadija. And I think there's a very common thread in your presentation. We've got a lot of the presenters have also said today, we're seeing a lot of collaboration of stakeholders. And we have our final, last but not the least, conversation today from Rashid from Policy. Rashid, you have the mic.
Everyone, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Sharing my screen. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Sajid Rashid, and I'm the Data Products Fellow at Policy. I'm excited for this session and hope you learn something from it. So briefly about Policy, it's an award-winning feminist collective of technologists, data scientists, all working at the intersection of data. In case you want to know more, there's a link at the bottom there. Next slide. This is an overview of what we'll be covering in this session, and without any further ado, let's get to it. So, understanding algorithm bias. So, to understand algorithmic bias, we should first understand what bias means itself. So, Bias is basically inclination of prejudice against one person or group of people, and it's always considered to be unfair in a way. So now algorithm bias in the end is like whereby an algorithm is mainly favoring a certain group of people, like instead of and disadvantaging another group of people. So one of the examples of this was the recent scenario that happened. Google's model called Imagen, whereby it was generating historically incorrect images. So for instance, as you can see, there are some examples where a user asked it to generate images of 1943 German soldiers. And as you can see, some of the images have got Asian people in it. So that's one of the major causes of bias and should be definitely like different approaches should come up, like try to avoid it. But now, where does this bias come from? This bias comes from data because AI is mainly data-based, and if the data that you're providing to the model is garbage, then definitely you're going to get garbage out of the system. So you have to make sure that the data is very, very has got a high quality to avoid this. So to prove this, I tried to come up with a simple survey. And I went to Kaggle. Kaggle, if you don't know Kaggle, it's one of the most popular. It's the first place in case you need data set, and most especially, it's got a lot of resources online, database data sets, and also codes and all that. So I was looking for a data set that best fits African context. So, for instance, African face data set. And for all the sources that I got, one source, for African face, there was only one data set, as you can see it at the bottom there. And like this data set was just it only had two upvotes, meaning that it wasn't that of high quality. Compared to other data sets, we've got one for Indian and also the total face data set, that's over 323 data sets. So what are the outcomes of such a scenario? If you go to the next slide. So I trusted most of the popular models right now. That's Meta's AI generation tool, Midjourney, and Flux. So the prompt was generate an image of a brilliant woman. So this just showed that most of the models are biased because all the images that were generated weren't based in the African context. So one of the major reason, the first reason as to why this is so, because we find that African-based data sets are very little. So this, as a result, leads to bias. So data is very, very essential for to avoid the biases. Next thing is models complexity. So when coming up with models, the complexity is also another issue because models can overfit the data set. So now in case the data set is highly biased, this would mean that the model will be able to understand everything about the data set. So, and after understanding everything about the data sets, and if the data set is very biased, that means the model will definitely also become biased. The other thing is underfitting, and this happens whereby the model maybe just tries to learn just few of fails to generalize properly on the data. And after failing to generalize properly on the data, the overall performance might end up being based on the different parts of the data, just a few, a portion of the data set. And again, this is also another scenario that should be avoided. Next slide. So how can we mitigate this bias? Because we've seen, yes, we've got these models, but then how can we mitigate this biasness? So one way is definitely to ensure that we come up with a diverse and representative data. This was also something that was raised in one of the presenters talked about it, that they're ensuring they're collecting diverse data. And yeah, this is one of the most things. But one of the issues with this is that we've got data imbalances. For instance, now if you're trying to come up with a model that you want to ensure that it captures maybe different types of people, categories of people. For instance, you might want in the education perspective, you want maybe I've had one of the presenters were talking about ensuring that the data also considers people with disabilities and all that. So if you're to come up with data like that, you might find that most of the data that you're going to find will especially depending on your collecting mechanism, but you may not be able to capture all different categories of people. So in the end, you end up with something like this, whereby we've got two classes for this simple example illustration here, whereby class A has got more data and the other class B has got fewer data. So this as a result, if you're to train a model for that case, you might find that the model is going to definitely be biased to class A. So one way to avoid this is to carry out something called oversampling. That's where you're going to ensure that the minority class, you just repeat all of the samples in the minority class such that it tries to have the exact same number of elements as the majority class. So that's one way of doing it. Next slide. But that approach mainly works for tabular data, that is data in tables, Excel sheets, and so on. But then we've got now issues whereby you're working on a problem that requires text data. And for text data, we don't want like the model to be learning only one particular text. So you have to make sure that we try to like give it different forms of text data such that it's able to learn how like text, like the different, like how text works and all that. So one way to do this is to carry out something called paraphrasing, and paraphrasing is just like to ensure that you are meaning the same, like you're ensuring that you're consistent with the meaning, but just giving different ways of like which you can structure that particular like text. So for this case, we've got a simple text there. I'm satisfied with the product, and we paraphrase to all these different ways. And also we've got synonym replacement, whereby you're just going to replace just particular synonyms within the sentence. As a result, you have one particular text, but it's able to like come up with multiple different texts over it. So this as a result can help you increase on the data set, and afterwards like try to prevent the biasness to maybe a particular group or maybe like a particular class in this case. Next slide, please. So we've seen how it works for image data, but then text data, but then how can we do it for image data? For image data, what we mainly carry out is called image augmentation, and basically under image augmentation, we're just going to like, given an image, we're just going to like try to come up with multiple other different images by carrying out a number of different approaches. So for example, you can flip the image, rotate, expose, zoom it out, and on. So that means that from just one image, you can be able to get like over like around 4 different samples just from one image. And this as a result also tries to mitigate like the issue of biasness, whereby like for cases of data imbalances, biasness mainly arises from issues of data imbalances. So you have to make sure that the model is as diverse as possible. Next slide, please. Yes, the other option is called random erasing. This is also another approach used in image augmentation. And for a given image, you can just keep on erasing just particular parts of that image, and the overall outcome can again help you increase on the overall data set. Next slide. So more on mitigating this bias. Now, like other way to mitigate this bias is trying to carry out ethical AI, and also one of the speakers talked about it. They're trying to ensure that they're building ethical AI. So because once you're building your models and all that, you have to make sure that you're at least able to explain them, because one of the biggest one of the biggest fails of AI models, most especially these ones that are used for cases like the chat GPTs and all that. So one of the biggest disadvantages is that they're black box models, meaning that it's almost impossible to understand why it came up with a particular prediction. So for instance, now, if your model is biased, you would want to know why is it biased. And the best way to do that is to carry out it's a field under artificial intelligence called artificial explainable AI. Another explainable AI, you try as much as you can to try to explain why your model come up with that particular result. And one of the most popular approaches used in next AI is we've got Sharp, Lime, and Alert. We had a session previously in collaboration with CC Hub, and in case you're curious to know more, I added a link just down there. Next slide, please. More ways to mitigate bias. So this other approach is called human in the loop. So now the way this works is that you're going to make sure that you're going to interact with the model, like the model interacts with an actual human during its training process. So for instance, we've got a simple illustration here whereby like the model sends a feedback saying that like given this maybe input and all that, it's going to output like how do you like this? And then the image would be like, like you should do it this way. So this, as a result, makes the model try to understand, and also the human can easily be able to notice any kind of imbalance or any form of biasness in the model, and such that you'll be able to like rectify it accordingly. Next slide. All in all, the field of artificial intelligence is growing. It's just in the process of growing. Like it keeps on growing every single time. So more and more research keeps on coming like every single time. So And due to the time, I wouldn't have to like go through all the possible like approaches. But I added a couple of links that you can try out in case you're curious, and I'll also be providing my socials in case you want to know more. So like you can just reach out. Next slide. So the role of AI in education. So I've seen a lot of good presentations by the previous speakers about how they're using AI to do this. So literally the potential of AI in education is just best, and it's literally limitless. It's just all about your imagination, because AI is just a tool that you can use to apply to your imagination. You can use it in tutoring, automation, like anything. Like AI can do almost anything that you can think of. So it's just the limit to it is just your imagination. So, but those are some of the examples that can be used. Next slide. What are the major risks? The major risks when it comes to using algorithm bias is basically inaccurate assessment. And this is also something that was some of the previous speakers were talking about, because once you're building your model, you have to make sure that it doesn't favor particular, for instance, now when it comes to like sensitive topics like education, because once you're building your model, you wouldn't want it to be like maybe it's favoring men over, women. Like you have to make sure that it's very, very bad, like it's not biased at all. Like you have to make sure that you mitigate the biasness as much as possible. And that can be through the previous steps or the tricks that you can use to mitigate bias. But that's something that has to be like very, very, like you have to ensure that your model doesn't work on this. And we've got discriminatory outcomes, excavation of digital divide, reinforcement of it, like a lot of risks are there. So like just when you're building your model, is just something that you have to work on. Otherwise, in case of any supplements or questions, do reach out. And I want to conclude by thanking you for being a good audience. I'm open to any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rashid. And thank you to all the thank you to all the speakers today, all the presenters. These were 6 excellently presented, very packed conversations. And there's already conversations happening in the chat. I see a conversation about local content and about how our priorities should be innovation from Africa by Africans with our own technology as opposed to just replicating. And I've seen feedback from Oluwaseun, one of the speakers, to say that for EdTech, the priority should really be the content and innovative pedagogy. I think that's how it's pronounced, as opposed to just like innovative tech. And how that companies have started to focus even more on content innovation. So now we can take questions if you have any, or if you have any comments you also would like to make. This is a great time. You can just raise your hand and we'll take your questions, we'll take your comments. If you want to contribute to anything else that has been said on the chat, this is also a really great time to make that contribution. There's also a lot of resources on the chat, especially from Doreen, who posts on other studies that have shown the effectiveness of ITS in teaching and in learning. So you can also use those links that have been provided. Do you have any questions? Do you have any feedback, any comments? Any questions, any feedback, any comments? By the way, you can just raise your hand if you have that. By the way, please feel free to reach out to Rashid, reach out to CC Hub, reach out to LRC, check out the documents, check out the resources that have been sent. We actually are supposed to have 1 hour, 30 minutes. That's why I'm still dragging this. But if you guys want to close early, why not? I know that it's a lot to consume, everything that has been discussed. And I'm also just going to pop in the chat box links to our previous AIRA talks, where you would also find this AIRA talk for your re-enjoyment and for your re-listen. Also, follow AIRA on X and on LinkedIn, because we always have many of these opportunities and many of these conversations that you can always join in. All right. All right. I will also do an email to all the registrants where you have access to many of the resources that have been discussed here. If there are no further questions, permit me to say one big thank you to all the speakers. Thank you to the speaker thank you to Oluwaseun, thank you to Doreen, thank you to Nicodemus, thank you to Khadija, thank you to Devon. Thank you to Rashid. I hope I didn't miss anyone out. Thank you so much for your great presentation. Thank you also to the organizations, the CC Hub, to CPIT, to LRC, to Keep Tenets, to Paradigm, and to Policy for providing great resource to our community here and for showing that you guys indeed are the experts. Like Nena said at the beginning, this is the African Internet Rights Alliance. We're an alliance of leading organizations on digital rights on the continent, and we host these conversations as well as other conversations that our members hold. To ensure a continuation in conversations around this. Conversations are never too much because it's in these kinds of conversations that something sparks in you. I know for me, I've learned a lot, and there's some ideas I'm leaving here with that I would definitely follow up in my own personal work and just with my work in AIRA. And so if any of the things that were discussed here sparked something more, please feel free to reach out to any of the speakers. Also, feel free to reach out to me. I'm popping my email address in the chat box as well. If you would like to collaborate with any AIRA member, please reach out to me as well, and we can discuss what is possible. Once again, thank you and have a wonderful weekend. Nina, I know I'm putting you on the spot, but I wonder if you have any final words for everyone.
Just to say thank you. And like Adebora has said, let's keep the conversations going. Let's work together. Let's collaborate to continue to advance the work we do in digital rights and inclusion. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Adebora.
Thank you, Nina, and thank you, everyone. Have a lovely rest of your day. Remember, please sign up to our monthly newsletter on aira.africa, where you can always get resources. Bye.